Welcome to Interviews from Mexico. I'm Laura Carlson, and I'll be your host as we look at cutting-edge issues with the men and women who know them best, here on Telesur.
Me siento afortunada y dichosa de saber que puedo contarle esto a otras mujeres que pueden salir adelante y que se quiten esa venda de los ojos.
In Mexico, thousands of women are trapped in circles of violence. There's a national network of shelters, but how can these services help women and girls get out of these situations of violence? And what can society do to break the vicious circle?
Ahora digo, estoy aquí y estoy bien y echándole ganas y sabiendo que todo se puede, dándome mi lugar, queriéndome yo misma y saber que valgo más de lo que me hacían creer.
To talk about these questions, we're here today with Wendy Figueroa. Wendy, thank you for being with us on Interviews from Mexico. Wendy is the director of the National Network of Shelters here in Mexico. Wendy, family violence and gender violence, how big a problem is it in Mexico?
Well, it's a problem of Latin America and worldwide. It's a problem that transcends all spheres. It's a question of public health, a problem of human rights, and access to justice that transcends not only with women victims of violence and with their children, but also with all the people around them, given that the effects of violence that women and their children suffer also transcends to people around them, like their family, their school, and at work. So for that reason, it's a problem that really we have to address immediately, but also in an integral way.
So it has a huge effect on society at large.
Exactly. We can't just break it up into the personal area, but also the community, political, and also economic areas. Why? Because the consequences of the violence that the victims suffer affect the economic issues of the country.
Well, when we're talking about Mexico, do we know approximately how many cases we're talking about?
Well, there are two different statistics. We have the information of the shelters, which are these specialized places where women unfortunately have to flee from their homes due to the extreme situation of violence that they are experiencing within the home. So in the shelters where women go whose lives are at risk, we are talking about approximately 5,000 a year. Women, girls, and boys who receive attention there.
But then this is just a fraction of the cases of violence that are out there, isn't it?
Exactly. These are just those who come to the shelter, but there is a much larger quantity of those women who begin to identify the situation of violence and whose lives are not at risk and who need attention through external services. This is to say what we call the centers of specialized attention, and well, there the quantity triples of number of women who go to these services.
And do we even have a way to quantify that?
Look, from the civil society, we're making an effort to precisely have hard data. That is, key statistics of how many women exist in Mexico who require this service, this attention. We have a system of impact indicators where on average in the external service centers, we are attending to more than 20,000 persons a year for these actions of prevention. However, we also know that there isn't a culture of reporting. There are many cases that are not presented that we can't count because they haven't made use of this culture of filing reports and access to justice.
So this is a network, a phone line or something where women can call in if they feel that they're at risk of violence or suffering violence?
Yes, the registry we have based on the cases we serve in person on the national level in the external attention centers and shelters. But yes, we do also have a phone line, 01800, where both women victims of violence can call us so we can give them orientation and accompany them in what we call their security plan, what to do in a situation of risk, or on the other hand, organizations or other persons or a neighbor or family members who can call to tell us that such and such a person is in a situation of risk, we can help her to make decisions or refer her, if necessary, to a shelter or external center.
Well, tell us a little about the shelters themselves. What kind of services do they provide?
Principally in a shelter, what the woman finds, and in the case that her sons and daughters are with her, too, is a safe place where she can finally spend the whole night without worrying about someone who's going to show up and attack her and her children. And after that, a whole process of integral attention begins, where there are specialist professionals who provide psychological, medical, social, legal, and educational services and training for employment. Because what we seek through the shelters is mainly to protect their lives, but also also to promote the process of empowerment and autonomy of women.
Well, do they only stay one night, or do they stay for a period of time until they think they're out of risk, or how does that work?
No, the shelters, this is a big difference. The shelters have an average of 3 months of attention. This could be more or less depending on what the woman herself needs. We are starting a procedure called emergency houses, where a woman can stay 1 to 5 days only. But this is an exceptional case where she, for example, has support networks, and all she needs is for us to contact the support networks that she can go to. But the refuge centers are an integral procedure for a period where they work, and furthermore, when they can go out of the shelter, we continue to do follow-up.
And can you describe for us a typical case of a woman who arrives at a shelter?
Well, the majority of the women arrive without knowing that these safe places exist. They don't have information. They first arrive at the external centers, where it's the public face of the shelters, and they begin to comment that there are things that they don't like, and we begin to evaluate the risk situation, and we help them to identify their condition, because violence is justified. Not only in Mexico, but at the global level, violence is justified. It's minimized, it's made invisible. So what we help them and encourage them to take stock of is that what they are experiencing is something that harms their physical and emotional integrity. It's a crime worldwide, and furthermore, there are other forms to resolve this.
So many women kind of think this is something they have to suffer in silence.
That's right. And the majority of those who arrive come not for a catastrophic event of physical violence, but rather they come to us due to an emotional incident where they were affected in the part of their relationship with their children, or where the aggression has affected their children directly.
So it's usually a chronic situation.
And that's when they identify that it's not something they want to continue to tolerate, and that's when we begin to give them information. The problem with violence is that people who are not informed, and it's something that it's not natural, and it begins to be justified by culture and by society and the media and the home. What we begin to do is that the woman realizes that this is not normal and that she has other alternatives. That's how the women come to us, justifying the violence.
So there's a big challenge there in terms of public education. Well, we're going to take a short pause and come right back to that point. We'll be back after a brief pause.
El 25 de noviembre conmemoramos el Día Internacional de la Eliminación de la Violencia contra las Mujeres y las Niñas.
Para erradicar la violencia en contra de mujeres y niñas, yo me uno.
Yo me uno para eliminar la violencia contra mujeres y niñas en los lugares de trabajo.
Yo me uno para poner fin a la violencia contra mujeres y niñas en los hogares.
Yo me uno para erradicar la violencia contra mujeres y niñas en los espacios de tutela y cuidado del Estado.
Yo me uno para eliminar la violencia contra mujeres y niñas en el ciberespacio.
Yo me uno para erradicar la violencia sexual en contra de mujeres y niñas.
Yo me uno para poner fin a la violencia contra mujeres y niñas en las escuelas.
Yo me uno para eliminar la violencia contra mujeres y niñas en los espacios públicos.
En febrero del 2008, el secretario general de las Naciones Unidas, Ban Ki-moon, emprendió la campaña Únete para acabar la violencia contra las mujeres y las niñas.
We're back with Wendy Figueroa, the director of the National Network of Shelters, and we were talking about the general types of cases of women in situations of violence that arrive at the shelters every day. Now, Wendy, I was wondering, can you talk to us about a particular case?
Yes, of course. Just now, I was remembering a woman who we had as a case last week, Monica. She came from another state of the Republic, and she arrived because she had filed a report against her attacker, and she had 3 children with her.
She'd already gone to the police then.
That's right. She had already begun a formal complaint process, but the attacker, as happens in many cases, has influence in the legal system, has economic funds, and well, this made it so her report was hidden. And they even tried to blame her in this question that she's a bad mother or a bad influence on her children. She managed to make it to Mexico City. She approached one of the shelters of our network, and well, when we started to talk to her, it's a situation of extreme violence, where she was kidnapped in her own house, where the attacker was related to the legal system in the city. And well, access to justice, of course, for Monica never happened. And she had to be protecting her children every night because the violence also spread to them. There was sexual abuse against her own children. And well, she decided to leave the home on several previous occasions, but we know that the social networks did not support her. The family was telling her to give him another chance. Maybe you're exaggerating.
The family itself.
Sure, we know that the problem of violence precisely has to do with the social and family environment where it seems like they justify it, or as we say in Mexico, it's a cross you have to bear. In this sense, she, in her attempts when she tried to leave that home, well, there wasn't the support, not social or family, what would help her so she could get out. She managed to leave thanks to a neighbor who was a great support network who informed her that there were these spaces. And while today she's in a shelter, the first 2 days when she was there, if she heard a police siren or an ambulance in the night, she would hide under the bed, no? She thought that they were chasing her due to all the influence that the attacker had. Today I can tell you that she sleeps peacefully, she hasn't had to take her medication, and she has a very close relationship with her children. Not of overprotection, which is what happened before, when she was already trying to protect them so nothing would happen to them. So she has been able to understand that it's not her fault, what she's experiencing, and that there are other forms to relate to her children. And well, she's been there barely a week. A few hours ago, we were able to sit down and talk with her, and she began to see that actually she has personal tools to not continue in the situation of violence. So although she is discouraged by the justice system, she also knows that there are other organizations like the National Network that can stand by her so the process will be more effective. We know there will be many obstacles, but we're helping her.
So it's not just a question of protection. A woman has to go through a whole transformation of her social environment and psychologically as well.
Exactly. What you just said is fundamental because the shelters is the first place, as I was telling you, are spaces where they can be secure and save their lives. But there is a whole emotional, psychological, and accompaniment process where once they have recovered their self-esteem and their capacity to make decisions, they can choose what they couldn't choose outside because they couldn't even say what they were thinking, what they were feeling, or what they wanted, an aspect that is also violence, psychological violence.
Yeah, so this is a real circle of violence. In your services, how do you work precisely to break that circle of violence? And also, what can a society do to help that?
Well, what we do in the shelter, inside the shelter, is to carry out actions of attention, prevention, and awareness, both with the women and with the children. This is something very characteristic of the shelters in Mexico. We work with the sons and the daughters to promote a culture of good treatment from the first years of life, because we know that gender inequality has to do also with this kind of education that is totally stereotyped and has prejudices toward one gender or another. So we begin with actions inside the shelters, and simultaneously in the external centers we also have actions of prevention where we go to the community, including parents. We go to the schools, we go to businesses where they open the doors to us precisely to encourage a culture of good treatment and to debunk the idea that the violence is something natural. We work to give the population these mechanisms of alert so they can identify if they are in a situation of violence, including in courtship, so they can prevent these situations and so they learn to establish equal relationships with respect and above all differentiating the respect and the difference of the different, which is something that generally is not done. The different is discriminated against for being different.
So it's really important to go to the roots of the problem and to work on these aspects of prevention within society.
Exactly. We do prevention and attention, and also from the National Network we promote public policies for real access for women victims of violence and their children.
And I was struck by the first story of Monica, where you talked about this element of corruption, where she was actually discriminated against when she went to report what was happening to her and to her family because of the influence that her partner had within the justice system itself. Is it common that you run into this kind of discrimination and corruption?
Unfortunately, yes, I could tell you that not only in Mexico, but throughout Latin America, there isn't this awareness and this access to justice, nor application of justice with the gender perspective. This application is really lacking. This is what causes women to not believe in filing reports, and they don't talk about the situation they are experiencing. Fortunately, Monica could find a neighbor who knows that these spaces exist, so she could find a place that supported her and gave her a place of refuge.
And do you find that they feel safer going to your shelters than they do to the authorities sometimes?
Yes, the majority of the women do not know that there are shelters, and we have to keep them confidential, but they do know that there are external centers, or that this is what we are trying to publicize. And precisely, civil society organizations arrive, and they know that they aren't going to judge them or invent excuses for not helping them.
And when you say external centers, what are you talking about? Hospitals, schools, or what's their point of encounter before they get to the shelters?
The external center is a public part of a shelter. That is to say, the model in Mexico is that all shelters have an external center, which is the public face, the point of first contact for any woman, boy or girl, or even man who is recognizing that he or she is in some context of violence. There we identify the risk and we initiate either the process with the woman in an external form or we refer her to a shelter. This is the contact, the link.
Because the shelters are in secret locations, aren't they?
Yes, in fact, our general law of access for women to a life without violence talks about the importance that the shelters are in a secret place. Their location is confidential. We can't receive a woman directly in a shelter. If we did, we'd put her at risk and the other women and the work team. So an external center is a bridge of contact between a shelter and external services.
That's an important factor to keep in mind. We'll go to another short pause and we'll be right back.
No podemos esperar a actuar una vez al año.
No podemos esperar a actuar una vez al año.
No podemos esperar a actuar una vez al año.
Rompe el silencio, actúa. Rompe el silencio, actúa.
¡Huepaje! Rompe el silencio, actúa.
Yo me uno con mi canto. ¿Tú cómo te unes?
¿Tú cómo te unes?
En ONU Mujeres nos unimos con las mujeres, los hombres, jóvenes, niñas, niños en México para poner fin a la violencia contra las mujeres y las niñas. Es tiempo de comprometernos, es tiempo de romper el silencio, actuar. ONU Mujeres se une, yo me uno. ¿Tú cómo te unes?
Welcome back. We're talking to Wendy Figueroa about the National Network of Shelters and Violence Against Women. Wendy, I noticed that your last Congress had as its theme the Agenda for Development 2030 and Violence Against Women. What's the relationship there?
Well, one of the key features of the 2030 Agenda is Objective Number 5 that talks about gender equality and the elimination of violence against women, girls, and boys on the global level. That's where we, as civil society organizations that work in favor of women's rights, emphasize the importance that really their Agenda 2030 begin to be put into practice not in 2030, but rather starting now. Because women are more than half the population of any country, and this implies that if they are not involved in a process of citizenship and have access to justice, and also are all the resources that correspond to them for being citizens of these countries, well, then the development of that country can't be equalitarian and it can't be sustainable.
So violence against women has an impact on women in all spheres, in economic, social, and political development then.
Sure, in fact, violence on the world level is considered the biggest proof of inequality between genders, but also an obstacle to the development of any country or any society. That's why it's important to eliminate it, to attend to it, and to sanction it with effective measures so that a country can have sustainable, really sustainable development in all spheres, as much in economy as in ecology. The participation of women is fundamental for processes of ecology and the rescue of the environment. Sometimes it's not very visible, for example, but the indigenous and rural women have a fundamental role and activity in maintaining the environmental equilibrium and for the rescue, the use, or the natural resources that we have.
So everybody knows it's a violation of human rights and it's wrong, but then it also has this role in the productivity of women and their full participation in society. That's something a lot of people don't often think about. Well, let's go back to the network itself. How many shelters are there throughout Mexico?
In the whole country, they talk about approximately 72 shelters, which we can assure that all of them are shelters. There's a difference between a refuge shelter and an emergency shelter. I can tell you that the shelters that are within a model of specialized attention that comply with the requirements to provide quality services with full respect for human rights and with a gender perspective, these are the ones that make up the national network. We are 44 shelters, 33 are civil associations, and 11 of the government. The other 28 spaces that are considered as shelters are in a process through a census that was carried out by the National Institute of Statistics and Geographic Information in collaboration with the Institute of Women and the National Network of Shelters to define if they are homes for women of violence, if they are emergency shelters, if they're houses of emergency or shelters. Each one has a fundamental role, and we think that to attend to the violence against women, they have to exist. But it's very important to define that the shelters have the process of empowerment, of citizenship, of independence with the women, and that our services are not charity, but rather specialized, integral care that promotes access to justice and especially full enjoyment of the rights of women victims and their sons and daughters.
And do you see a need for this network to grow? I mean, do you consider that you're fulfilling most of the demand, or is there still a large part of it that's unfulfilled?
We would love that those spaces that are not in the network and that are really shelters, that they should incorporate with this, of course. We think that it's never going to be sufficient, unfortunately, the places that exist, because it overwhelms our capacity to provide services. But we also work so that there are not only shelters, but that those that already exist are fortified, that we have a labeled and effective budget so we continue to provide attention. Sometimes more shelters are created, but they don't have a philosophy and they are not accompanied by a budget and that is sufficient and with a gender perspective that can allow us to continue with this labor. More than that, we believe in strengthening the ones that exist. And for those that are operating as shelters, that they join the network. We're also seeking the implementation of an effective law that sanctions violence for the crime that is, to assure that women have a life free of violence. This would really help us to avoid the women have to flee from their own homes.
Well, it's such important work that you're doing, and we certainly hope that these goals can be reached and well before 2030. Wendy Figueroa, thank you for joining us on the show today. And thank you. We'll be back next week on Interviews from Mexico.